The LCS's Players Association seems to have little influence, especially when it comes to this current topic that we're having right now about the import rule within the LCS and whether it should be changed, modified, or just completely abolished, or just, kept the same, I guess. Now, there are some good things that the actual Players Association has done that I think a lot of people have forgotten. First of all, they've changed the practice schedule for all teams to basically be more uniform, to where Team A isn't playing at 11 o'clock in scrims, and then Team B is playing at 3 o'clock at scrims, for their start, and etc. Right? So it's more of a uniform practice schedule. So, players have time, presumably, to have off at the same time, to where, maybe they could go out with each other. They have friends on different teams and whatnot, and, they probably all roll with the same clique or whatever. So, yeah, I agree. That's kind of a good thing. And then, they fixed the Echo Fox loophole famously, to where, which was basically that you could drop players, in a heartbeat. So it was like players like Adrian, Altec, and Phoenix back in the day got completely fucked and just had to scramble to look for a team. I want to say it was within 48 hours or something ridiculous, right? So they helped fix that and kind of implement a rule to where, well, now you have to give a reasonable amount of time for players to find a new team and get a new contract and whatnot, right? So great, fantastic stuff. They also fought for tournament realm access, right? And, obviously Tournament Realm is over in Los Angeles. So, professional players can play on low ping, or academy players and whatnot, even the ability to invite select high-profile solo queue players, for instance. And then they also fought to be able to stream on this entire server, right? Which was another big leap or jump and whatnot, which was previously restricted. So they fought really hard for that. And, well, now we could kind of see where the fuck that's at now. And then they created a database for salaries, presumably older salaries. I think it was like salaries that were 2019 or something like that. But it was said that it helped player salaries increase something like, I think it was 20% or 30%. I think it was 30%. Increased by an average of 30%, which is huge, right? So, assumingly that also helps all the rookies and stuff who really don't know their worth. They can't really judge how much they should be paid. That's where it mostly helps, because, well, if you're a veteran player, you just judge yourself and your previous salary and maybe the next guy's salary and whatnot that is of similar skill level, but generally just judge yourself and how much you've improved, and you go from there. So it's a really big help for the entire scene. And that's not to diminish all of those things, but seemingly when it comes to this import rule, I feel like the Players Association is kind of dropping the ball. And I don't mean in the sense that they aren't doing anything. It's that they're focusing on the wrong thing. So Darshan, president of the Players Association, recently came out and said that they're handling things behind the scenes within a Travis Gafford interview, right? But then he ends up focusing, the conversation and whatnot of what, I guess, presumably the Players Association is focusing on, which is changing ping and the player tool being, multiplayer, right? Because right now it's, of course, you can only go into the practice tool to where, it's only you, and you can't go with like a team of 5 or, a 5v5, rewind time and practice something over and over again. So with that said, though, so that means that the things that directly benefit the current pro players, you would rather focus on than, I guess, amateur talent. That's basically what it's saying. It's like the LCS players are like a fucking, you've seen those dog on like a treadmill or whatever, and it has like the fucking the hot dog, or I guess be a horse on a treadmill with a carrot or whatever. That basically it's just that whatever directly concerns themselves, they're selfishly applying their own kind of motives, I guess, and whatnot. And they aren't even addressing the broader problem of amateur talent and why the owners want imports to begin with. Which, by the way, you'll notice, in Reginald's Medium statement that he stated problems which he thought Riot nor the players can fix. So the obvious problem, the obvious solution is imports, right? Like, it's very difficult to fix ping. It's almost impossible to fix player base, right? So that's the reason why you would state that argument anyways, rather than try and state the things that you can fix, in fact. So it just shows where his fucking mind is at. I also cynically think players know that they can personally benefit from this by implementing the obvious solution, which is either, at least for the ping solution, which is either move the servers to LA or back to Oregon, which was originally where the servers were back in the day, back in, I think it was season 3, season 4. Or, you could create like this shard system, right? To where basically players within a certain game, whatever game that queues up, it would read all the players, determine the location of where they're at, and then use that server that is closest to that person. So obviously there would be an LA server and there'd be a Chicago server. And say if there were 5 LCS players in the game, who were in LA, then it would choose the LA server. And so, yeah, sure, the East Coast players would get shittier ping, but it's like, well, half of the people within the server are from LA. And not only that, but they're pro players. So we're going to give priority over to this server instead, right? So those are like the hypothetical things, but which would still benefit themselves, the pro players, which is back to square one about the current pro players being the focus rather than the amateur scene as a whole. And by the way, even if Riot, presumably fix the practice tool, you think LPL, or especially LCK, the region that is known for meticulously planning and drilling shit over and over and over again, wouldn't be way better than the LCS with this change? You ever thought about that? How, in fact, I think all the LCS players should vote for that not to fucking happen. Because you're just going to get absolutely crushed, especially considering they have actual sister teams, not the amateur teams, which LCS players even refuse to play with or play against or even scrim against properly at certain times. So, and that LCK can have sister teams, which they can repeat drills over and over again. So you don't think that wouldn't just be a disadvantage for the LCS teams to begin with, given the culture that's already instilled anyways? Instead, you would think that the LCS Players Association would fight for academy players to have, I don't know, maybe more scrims, right? Because, you need to have more practice and more drills and basics upon the fundamentals in order to then build up your game further to where now you can think of things that are maybe a bit more extract that you don't necessarily need to have hardcore fundamental practice on, but it's more theory, like watching VODs and whatnot, and just kind of like theory crafting in essence. Or how about give them more positional coaches? Obviously they need to work on their mechanics. They need to work on their matchups. Maybe they don't have as wide of a champion pool as a veteran player, or just, fully give them an actual dedicated staff. A lot of amateur or academy players have been complaining that there really isn't a whole lot of staff, or players that have come from amateur to now be pro and LCS saying, yeah, there's clearly not enough staff. There needs to be more infrastructure in that. Why not, as Players Association, demand for that instead? Right? It seems like it would be much more of a benefit, to the overall amateur scene if that's what you're trying to do. In fact, if that's not what you're trying to do, then just say so. Just say that, no, We would rather kind of focus on the players that are in the LCS now and kind of try and level up them first, and then we could try and work back down from the amateur scene, or maybe it'll trickle down into that effect. I don't know what kind of PR bullshit that you would have to do. I get it. You're all used to hunting, the caribou and shit, like tracking the seasons and whatnot. And like being fucking nomads and trying to get what you can get within that particular season and not think about the future. I guess seasons are pretty apt, within this analogy. But sometimes you got to learn to farm and cultivate for the future so that the whole community can actually eat. And, there's actually a future within this entire ecosystem. And instead, you just want to get yours and kind of feed your own family and your own immediate success. And it seems as though the current crop of pro players are just so short-sighted in that regard. And then in this Travis interview, Darshan goes on to say that, the one power that they do have is coming together collectively. And he even goes on to say that they aren't doing, which is a really big problem when you think about just the origins of even when the Players Association first began, and that it began so long ago. And you'd think that the older players within this entire league would actually, kind of enjoy taking up responsibility to help all the younger players, which in part is the reason why I think the academy and amateur scene is just so utterly fucked, is because all these older players don't really give a shit about the Players Association, first of all, because they're getting theirs anyways. They already have all their contracts secured. They already have all their connections and whatnot. So, like, why should they give a fuck about the broader ecosystem, especially considering that a player's career is so short within esports? Why would they care about the longevity of it necessarily? Because it's not going to help them 3 years down the road when, they no longer have a career. So it's very short-sighted in that regard. So, I think just that, along with the idea that LCS players also just frankly don't want their spot taken by academy players. So why would they put any of their efforts into helping the players, which then could potentially replace them? And I think this is where the massive advantage lies in, say, for instance, a region like the LCK, to where there are sister teams, or, there are even teams below that to where it's trainee teams and whatnot. And it's to where they've already developed this relationship of, what they call the dongsang and the hyung, right? The younger brother and the older brother, and how the older brother teaches the younger brother about, just life in general. But, in this circumstances, it would be the game and how to play the game and kind of how to make themselves into a better player necessarily, or get further and further into their path to pro and whatnot. Now, let me just say from personal experience, I used to live with a Korean family, although in America, but, they have all the Korean culture and whatnot and kind of embedded within what they were doing over here. And I learned a lot about living with a Korean family, but more importantly, I also learned about the crazy dynamic of what, hyung is supposed to be. And, I kind of had a hyung too, within that family. And he taught me a lot about cars and about tuning and just about the intricacies of actually how to work on a car, or maybe just the brighter theory about a car, and like what caster is, or what camber is, or what coilovers are, and how it affects the suspension of a car and whatnot. And it was just a really crazy experience that I would have never gotten if I never had lived with them before. And it was kind of that relationship and how he took on that responsibility, I guess, of teaching me these things in which I obviously had an affinity towards, or just a curiosity towards. And so he fell into that, especially since he knew a lot about cars to begin with. Now, taking that in mind, I kind of see and I kind of get the logic, like someone like LS, when he talks about culture being a massive problem in North America, and it's completely ignored in these entire talks about, how to improve the amateur scene, or maybe what's wrong with the amateur scene itself. And I think that's what's kind of funny too about it, is that esports and North America talk so much about how we don't need to be like traditional sports, or, we don't need to follow American culture and whatnot. Well, now apply that same logic to how esports pros act within their own team, and how it seems so very individualistic in that sense, and how we did borrow a lot from Korean culture in terms of team houses and how they're structured and whatnot, but we actually never seem to borrow the whole cultural aspect too, and maybe how we should shift our culture itself, even though we have shifted our culture in terms of how esports wants to act, and maybe they want to be more inclusive of everything, but it seems that we've never changed the competitive aspect, or maybe what can make us competitive. Now I get it. You're potentially teaching your replacement, right? Which is, why the whole Hyung and Dongsang type scenario doesn't really work, when I was in that family or whatnot. But what's funny about teaching someone is that many people say, and I think this is largely true, is that they actually end up learning more about their own profession or their own skills or the way that they themselves do things through teaching that younger person. And so they end up getting a deeper knowledge about what they know about that particular subject through teaching someone, right? And I think that's why maybe a lot of teachers actually know in depth and maybe the nuances about a particular subject, is because they're so well versed that they have to break it down to its fundamental basis, to where now someone who doesn't know about that subject a whole lot it can now follow through this entire step and this entire progression. And so you yourself know this and can kind of tweak things, and maybe you didn't understand this in the very beginning, or rather you just thought about the basics in the very beginning, but you actually didn't pay it too much mind. You were just trying to nail down the fundamentals. But in fact, maybe you want to shape that because now you're a master at your craft, so to speak. And with that said, the reason why someone is a master at something is not because they follow the rules or they follow the fundamentals, is because, well, first of all, they know the fundamentals. And in doing so, and in knowing about the fundamentals, you know when to break them, right? I think the prime example of it is, of course, the jungle, for instance, and how there's fundamentals about the jungle, about, very optimal routes. You should do this on this champion. You should build this on this champion. You should go for these specific gank timers and whatnot. You outduel this opponent at this crab and this matchup. Well, that's all great and dandy, and that's really good for fundamentals, but the jungle just inherently, especially in pro play, is all about mind games. It's all about doing the unexpected and catching all these laners off guard, or these other junglers off guard, and doing the unexpected route or the unexpected gank or whatever, which gives your team an entire advantage. And that only comes with mastery. That only comes with knowing exactly what you should fundamentally do and kind of changing that up. Because, first of all, you're facing another human, so, they know the fundamentals themselves, at least if they're good enough as a pro. And so they know what you know, so you kind of do the fucking mind game, and it becomes all Inception and shit. But whole thing, being as a master of something, you do end up learning a lot more just from explaining the fundamentals to someone else. So personally, I think the entire LCS kind of deserves to fail at this point, if this is going to be the failure point, I guess. Because, where's the honor? Where's the integrity? right? It kind of just shows where NA is as a region when, for instance, like a foreign player like Bjergsen wants to become a coach and see the region succeed and kind of excel the player base and help propagate new talent and whatnot. And then we see a player like Double F just say, fuck it, let's just go into streaming. Let's not even try to be a coach. Let's not even try and, help these younger players, let's not even try and go into another team, maybe a lesser team, certainly, and help try and propagate that up. Maybe you could teach a thing or two. Instead, you just see him go to streaming, which is the entire NA mentality anyways, of just like, well, I don't get megabucks here, so yeah, let's just go into this instead because, I'm still going to get paid really well. And I'm not saying this to shit on Double F specifically, but he's just, the biggest, most profile, highest profile thing that has come up. But it's just that entire NA mentality, right? We've seen multiple pros instead go to streaming because it just makes more money, and they really haven't contributed to anything of larger when it comes to, I guess, propagating up higher youth and whatnot, other than being a great example and, a good, fantastic player. So let me take you back in time. Seemingly way back in October of 2020, where Riot said they would stop funding the LCSPA in a Travis Gafford interview once again. But even Darshan, fuck it. I don't know whether Darshan is going to keep going from Darshan or Zionspartan. I'm just going to fucking call him Zionspartan. Just, come on. Now's your new branding opportunity. Zionspartan. Anyways, Zionspartan said that they had enough funding to get through 2021. So that means presumably now, they have enough to actually hire the new executive director too in order to get through 2021. So, and even 10 days before that, the LCSPA said they would not employ the former executive director, Hal Biagas, for another year. So they've had this entire time, now you roll this into this year. The LCSPA had 4 months in order to get someone new, and they didn't even have to worry about funding. So that time frame is absolutely absurd. Sure, Corona and all, I get it, but 4 months and you don't have to worry about the bills at all. Fuck, people would kill to not have to worry about the bills. But it just goes to show how complacent and haphazard the LCSPA is. And it seemingly looks like, at least from the outset, that they just don't give a shit. And they're in it for themselves. They're in it for the current now and here. And I reiterate this once again, is that since esports careers are so short, they look short-sighted, right? They look in the 2-year span of, well, in 2 years from now, I'm really not going to give a shit about a players association. So why should I put money into this to help build this up to where I'm not even going to reap the benefits, I guess, immediately, because I already have everything figured out. I've already been acclimated to the scene. I have my inside sources. I know how to negotiate for my contract, etc. So why help build this thing up any higher anyways when I could just get my bag now? And it's just like that whole selfish ideology is exactly why the Players Association is currently at and stuck at to this current day. And I think that's quite sad, quite shameful. And frankly, I think it's just a lack of maybe, I don't know, leadership, I guess, that the veteran players aren't willing to take on. And I just think that's kind of sad, because they believe in, for some reason, that's going to take away their own job, when in fact I think that's one of the reasons as to why a lot of these other regions that have all these sister teams become better, is because, like I said, you learn through mastery and then going back to the fundamentals and kind of reworking your entire mind frame. So I just think LCS players are thinking from a completely different mindset. And yeah, maybe culture is the reason as to why this all fails. But it's also, I think, the root problem as to where we are today and how they really aren't getting to the root of the problems as to why we don't actually have a lot of amateur talent coming up, is because we aren't building the amateur systems, from the ground up. And it's because all these veteran LCS players are actually kind of afraid for their job.